Hey everyone, welcome to the Introduction to Fractions, Reading, Writing, and Comparing Fractions. So let's take a look. Fractions, they tell us about a part of something, a part of the whole thing. They tell us something is divided into pieces. Now, the fractions tell us how many pieces the whole is cut into, and they also tell us how many we're talking about at that time. So here's a pro tip. A unit fraction is a special kind of fraction that tells us that we're talking about one piece out of the whole. So only one piece is selected, like 1/2 or 1/3 or 1 out of 4 pieces or 1 out of 296 pieces. That's a unit fraction. It tells us there's only one piece we're choosing. All right, fractions are written in two main ways. In one way, the top number is written right over the top of the bottom number, and there's a line in between. That's called a stacked fraction if you're interested, but you can see a picture of it right here. Let me grab my tool right here. See how the number, one number is right over the top of the other number. That's one way. But the other way, the top number is a little bit to the left. It's on the top left. And the other number, the bottom number, is a little bit to the bottom right. So they're not straight up above each other. They're kind of at an angle. And then the line is a diagonal going in between the top left number and the bottom right number. So those are the two ways that you see fractions written. The one over the top is much better to get into practice of writing it like that when you're writing things out. It'll make it so much easier to do all the calculations, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, whatever we need to do. Use that top and bottom system. This one with the side to side with the angle, that's the way computers type it. We usually can't get computers to type up and down. So the computer types it one number, then the slash that's connected to the question mark, incidentally, and then the other number. All right, what are the names of the numbers? The bottom number is called the denominator. Say that, denominator. That's the bottom number in a fraction. It tells the number of pieces in the whole thing is cut into. So however many cuts are made in that piece, how many equal cuts, remember fractions have to have equal size pieces, however many equal cuts, that's that denominator. It could be bigger or smaller than the top number. If it's bigger, that's just a regular fraction. If it's smaller, like here, the 4 is smaller than the top number. If it's smaller, then we call that an improper fraction or a fraction that's greater than 1. Let's take a look at the numerator. The numerator is what we call the top number in a fraction. It tells the number of pieces that we're thinking about. In this case, we know the denominator told us our whole thing is cut into 8 pieces, but we're thinking and talking about 3 of them. So that's the numerator. The number on top tells us how many pieces we're looking at. Again, it could be bigger or smaller than the bottom number. Look at it, this. Here it is bigger. If it's bigger than the bottom number, we call that again an improper fraction or a fraction greater than 1. If it's smaller, it's just a fraction. That's just a regular fraction. Now, we're going to try to compare fractions. That means we're going to tell which one is bigger and which one is smaller. Now, the word compare in math means tell which one is bigger. The word compare, like in reading, means tell how two things are the same or how they're alike. That's not how we use it in math. We use it in math to say which one's bigger or more, which one's smaller or less. So take a look. In order for us to do that, we need to look at the top number and the bottom number. We need to look at the size of the piece. That's the bottom number. How big are the pieces? How can that help us? We also need to look at the number of pieces that we're talking about. That's the top number, the numerator. How can that help us to know how many pieces we're choosing? And then we're going to use greater than, less than, and equal to talk about that. All right. One strategy for comparing is to look at the denominators, the bottom numbers. If they're the same, if the bottom numbers are the same, it tells they're both cut into the same size pieces. How can that help us to figure out which one is more? Well, if the pieces, same size pieces are identical, take a look at this. They're all cut into eighths, 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 eighths. Then it gets a little bit easier to kind of just look and say, well, obviously this one I can see. This one has 5 out of the 8 pieces are selected. This one, 7 out of the 8 pieces are selected, almost all of them. And this one, only 2 out of the 8 pieces are selected. Since they're all the same size, it might be a little easier to tell that right there, that one, whoops, I just moved my picture, that one, 7/8 is the biggest. So if the denominators are the same, it's a little easier to tell which one is bigger and which one's smaller. What if the denominators aren't the same, but the numerators are the same? The top number is the same. Let's take a look at here. The pieces are different sizes. This one, it's 3/7 compared to 3/10. There it is. The numerators are both 3. So we see that 3 out of 7 pieces and 3 out of 10. So the pieces are different sizes. We have to remind ourselves that the smaller the pieces are, the bigger the number of pieces it's cut into. The bigger the pieces are, the smaller the number. It's a teeter-totter. It's like opposite. Big pieces means there aren't very many. Small pieces means there are more. So in this case, some pieces, this one's cut into 7. Those pieces are bigger. This one's cut into 10. Those pieces are smaller. So we have 3 of each. So we can tell if we have 3 of a bigger size pieces or 3 of a smaller size piece. The one that has more is the one with the bigger size piece. 3 of a bigger size has more. So 3/7 is more than 3/10. Here's my pro tip. The smaller the number of pieces, the bigger the pieces are, and vice versa. All right, let's try some of those problems before we go on to something that's a little trickier. So you need your comparing fractions worksheet. It looks like this. Now, let's look for one that either has the same denominator or the same numerator. So the directions say use 3 strategies. We've only talked about 2, but we'll get to the third one. Use 3 strategies to solve. Either same numerator, same denominator, or we'll talk about the third one, closer to 0 or half or 1. So let's look at this first question. It says 3/8 is compared to 3/4. What does that fit under? Which of those 3 strategies could we use? Same numerator, same denominator, or closer to 0, half, or 1? Well, I hope you said same numerator, the same number on top, 3/8, 3/4. The 3, the numerator is the top number, and it's the same. So if we have 3 pieces out of pieces the size of eighths, that means they took the whole thing and cut it into 8. Or we have 3 pieces the size of fourths. They took the whole thing and cut it into 4. Quickly sketch what that would look like on your paper. Pause and sketch 2 things. One's drawn into eighth, one the same size is drawn into fourths. You can do squares, circles, rectangles, doesn't matter, but sketch it and come back and see if we agree. All right, here we are. Now, unfortunately, my sheet got a little messed up when I changed it into a PDF, so the circles are off. Don't let that bother you. If the circles on your paper are in the right spot, awesome. If they're in the wrong spot, don't let that trick you. You know that we're comparing the 2 numbers that are next to, like number 1, number 2, number 3. So don't let that trick you. So here's my picture. Uh-oh, I see I made a mistake. I drew 2 circles. They're pretty close to the same, so I'm in good shape, but one is, I didn't change into fourths. One I was supposed to cut into eighths and 1/4. So I've got to pause and fix that. Check to make sure your 2 shapes are the same size and one is cut into eighths and one is cut into fourths. There, I fixed mine. Now, let's take a look. The first part says that the first picture is taken 3/8. That means 3 out of these pieces is what we're talking about. 3 pieces the size of eighths. The next number that we're comparing it to says 3/4. That means 3 out of the 4 pieces we're talking about are 4. There's still 3, but they're 3 pieces the size of fourths. So from the picture, does it look like 3 small eighths pieces or 3 larger fourths pieces are bigger? 3 eighths more or 3 fourths more? Well, I'm hoping you're saying 3 fourths is more. And remember, the mouth, the alligator mouth, eats the bigger number. So 3 fourths is more. So it's going to face towards, that mouth is going to face towards the 3 fourths. Pause and see if we can find another problem on this same paper that also has the numerator strategy, the same numerator. Can you find another problem that has that? All right, I'm noticing number 5, 4 sevenths and 4 tenths. So we're going to use that same numerator strategy. 4 sevenths, we're taking 4 pieces, and if the whole thing is cut into 7, 4 tenths, we're taking 4 pieces again, but the whole thing's cut into 10. Which one is more? 4 smaller pieces or 4 bigger pieces? Remember, the smaller and bigger are opposite of the numbers. So 10 is the smaller pieces, sevenths is the bigger pieces. So 4 of the bigger pieces versus 4 of the smaller tenths size. So the alligator mouth eats the bigger number. All right, let's find one where we can use the denominator strategy, the same denominator. Do you see anyone on here where it has the same denominator? Oh my goodness. I must not have put any on that have the same denominator. Whoa. Well, the good thing is that's the easiest strategy. All right, let's go on and learn about the third strategy. Oh, I lied. Okay, here's one. 2 fifths and 4 fifths. The denominator, same denominator strategy. They're both cut into fifths. They're both cut into 5 equal pieces. Is having 2 out of those 5 or having 4 out of those 5 more? You might be able to see why that's an easier one, because having 4 pieces the size of fifths is just bigger than having 2 pieces the size of fifths. Now let's go on to the new strategy. All right, the last strategy for today is to compare both the numerators and the denominators. They're both different. To compare them, are they closer, that fraction that we're talking about, is it closer to 0? Is it closer to a half? Or is it closer to one whole thing? So you're going to look at the size of the numbers and say to yourself, is whatever that fraction represents, is it really close to 1? Is it closer to a half? Or is it closer to 0? Closer to 0, closer to half, closer to 1. Here's the number line, and here's a picture. So my pro tip is sometimes drawing a model or drawing a picture of 2 identical holes and then cutting them up. Sometimes that can help. So let's look at 6 ninths and 2 fifths. We're going to decide each one, is it closer to 0, half, or a whole? And then that might help us. 6 ninths. Let's look here. There's the ninths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 ninths is a little bit more. If we go straight up towards the half, we see it's a little bit more than half. 6 ninths is a little more than half. 2 fifths. 1, 2. Oh, we see it's less than half. There's the halfway line. 2 fifths is less. If 6 ninths is more than the whole and 2 fifths is more than a half, and 2 fifths is less than a half, that means 6 ninths is more. So we're going to use that strategy of comparing, is it close to 0? Is it close to a half, bigger or little than a half, more or less than a half, or is it close to 1? All right, let's employ that strategy on our sheet. Look at number 3. Number 3 says 2 ninths and comparing it to 5 sixths. 2 ninths and comparing it to 5 sixths. Well, 2 out of 9 pieces. What would that look like? Is that closer to 0, closer to a half, or closer to the whole thing? Well, if it was 8 out of 9 pieces, it would be close to the whole, wouldn't it? If it was 4, around 4 pieces, that's about half, not quite. 4.5 is actually half of 9. This is 2 out of 9. So we're going to identify that that's closer. This one's closer to 0. And what about 5/6? That means we have 6 pieces, and we're talking about 5 of them, 5 out of the 6 pieces. That's one away from being the whole thing. So that's closer to 1. So 2/9 is closer to 0. 5/6 is closer to 1. That means we know our alligator mouth wants to chomp that 5/6. So go ahead and see what you can do with this paper. When you finish the video, do a couple more if you have time. Otherwise, finish this for your skill card. See you next time.